As someone who spends pretty much their whole time reading and is a big fan of both classic and contemporary fiction, one question I'm asked all the time is, are you a virgin? Kidding. Well, people probably ask that behind my back, but to my face, the question I'm always asked is which contemporary books are going to become classic books? And this is something I have been spending a lot of time thinking about recently because the New York Times Review of Books asked me, as part of a survey that they were doing, they got together a jury of lots of people all around the world, like a real microcosm of society, to submit books for a list that they are curating of the top books of the century so far. So as we approach 2025, alarmingly, this is quite stressful to even think about, we are actually approaching the end of Q1, the end of the first quarter of this century, the 21st century, which is weird because I was 14 years old yesterday, I'm pretty sure. But in the process of thinking about that, I devised my own list of 25 books that have been released recently that I think will be considered to be classics in 2024. You know, the books that people will be studying in school, the books that will be being studied by this English department. But first, my criteria. Number one, it needs to be a book that has critical or commercial acclaim and therefore have proven that they appeal to a somewhat wide audience. So I'm looking at literary prizes as well as bestseller lists. Two, it needs to have some kind of historical significance, historical relevancy or context. It shapes the culture in some kind of way, or it responds to the culture in some kind of way. And number three, beautiful writing. A high quality of writing, yes, but also specifically books that are highly symbolic and could be analyzed. A book you could write an essay about. Like, has a book ever resonated with you so much that you close the final page and you think, I want to write an essay about that? That is how you know it's great. So let's dive in absolutely no particular order. I cannot possibly rank these. I think I would have an aneurysm if I even tried to rank these books because I just think they're all so excellent and I'm excited to talk about them with you. So the first book I would like to propose as a modern classic is Girl, Woman, Other by Bernadine Everisto. This is a kind of state-of-the-nation, multi-generational book. It won the Booker Prize, and that in itself is an interesting history because it was one of the first books to share the Booker Prize. It's a multi-perspective story about a range of modern-day women having a range of experiences, but they are all interconnected. There's 12 core characters whose myriad experiences we explore, and it just feels like a portrait of modern womanhood and femininity and what it is to exist in the world as a woman. Interestingly, it was also the 8th book by Bernadine Everisto, but the first to really hit the mainstream and kind of launch her into public attention. It's kind of like the Chapel Roan of books. That's bear with me here. You know how Chapel Roan kind of recently blew up, but has a back catalogue of amazing songs that people have kind of been sleeping on and now they're only just discovering. That's kind of what happened with Bernadine Everisto's literary oeuvre. Once this book hit the mainstream, then people started discovering what an incredible talent she was. And this just feels like something everyone needs to study. I love this book. Now, a book that is structurally somewhat similar to Girl, Woman, Other is There by Tommy Orange. Now, this is a really important book, a real landmark book, in my opinion, about Indigenous people in America. This follows a similar structure to Girl, Woman, Other in the sense that we have lots of different perspectives and lots of different characters who all kind of come together at the end at one major event, in this case, a powwow. It's about the history and identities of Indigenous people. It's simultaneously about establishing community, but also feeling marginalized within a land that you had taken from you. Pace-wise, it just accelerates and accelerates to this huge crescendo, which is one of the most powerful climaxes of a book I've ever encountered. So teach this in the schools. If this is about standing the test of time, this would get an A+. I think it would trigger a lot of discourse and discussion about its themes. It's deeply textured. If you write an essay about this, I would like to read it. I would also like to pump it into my bloodstream. And it won the Penn Hemingway Award and the American Book Award. That is There by Tommy Orange, and I want to be wherever there is. Next, I'm going to say it, The Song of Achilles, because The Song of Achilles by Madeline Miller has created this Greek mythology renaissance in popular culture. You know, the success of this book has led to a whole range of Greek mythological retellings, and I think that is incredibly powerful and should not be overlooked. This also won the Women's Prize, and it's the perfect mix of critically acclaimed and celebrated by book reviewers, academics, but also commercially successful. And I already know that some people watching this are going to dismiss this as a book talk book. That boils my piss. Because, firstly, this book came out a decade before TikTok even existed, so that's anachronistic even as a statement. But secondly, just because this book happened to resonate with a lot of people on TikTok, that doesn't mean it's bad. That is actually testament to how good this book is. I've spoken about this a lot recently, but I would like to point out that BookTok book is just a marketing term, in the same way that classic book is really just a marketing term. When you go into a bookstore and you see a shelf of classics, which will have these homogenous covers of like Penguin World Classics or the cloth-bound classic covers, thematically, most of those books have nothing in common, aside from being old and aside from being revered by critics and having commercial success. They have stood the test of time. That's what renders them a classic. But aside from that, books by Tolstoy, by Dickens, by Austen, by Nabokov, by Shakespeare, you know, these books are sitting side by side on a shelf despite having next to nothing in common. I feel the same with BookTok book shelves in bookstores. It's just a marketing term. It basically just means popular today, primarily with a younger demographic. But newsflash, buddy, that's the future. The Song of Achilles is the story of Achilles and Patroclus growing up together and then heading to the Trojan War. It's elegantly written, it's moving, it's heartbreaking. Like, I'm surprised this book isn't water damaged from how much I cried reading it. It will take your heart, cradle it, like this, softly and tenderly, and then rip it into tiny pieces and throw it over you like confetti. That's how much this book will affect you. This encouraged a resurging interest in Greek mythology, and I love it for that. Okay, this next book is The Book Thief. This, to me, feels like a book that has just been around forever, and I was really surprised to find out it only came out in 2006. I do think a lot of people may argue that All the Light We Cannot See is the modern World War II novel. I would argue it's The Book Thief. This book is innovative, it's narrated by death itself. It's tragic, it's tough, it's also about hope and the human condition, the ways that we survive on our own, but also together. Set in 1939 in Nazi Germany, about a girl whose family have been sent to a concentration camp and is taken in by a foster family. I just think it's about human resilience, and it's beautiful, but it will make you so angry. And I think that's something that great fiction often does. It triggers a visceral response. I think this is a very, very special book. I think it's a very, very important book. It's a #1 international bestseller, so clearly some people agree with me. And I think it's one of those books that you will never forget reading, and for that reason, it's on my list. Rachel Cusk, Outline. This is a novel told through 10 conversations, but it's deeply, deeply personal. It's spare, it's lucid, it's ostensibly straightforward about a novelist in Athens for the summer, and you will drown in the level of depth that this book contains. I think it's paved the way for a kind of new style of literature, which can be very personal and vulnerable and explorative of one individual character. It feels like a very significant achievement. I feel like you can see the cultural impact it has had on the literary landscape, and that's really important. And specifically, I think it paved the way for writers like, this is my segue by the way, Sally Rooney. Hello! I would read Sally Rooney's tax returns. I would read her shopping list. I would read the sequence that she wrote out in Fridge Magnets. Normal People, I think, is an incredibly important book about human relationships, the ways that we communicate / miscommunicate. It won the 2018 Costa Novel Award. I'm pretty sure it was Booker Prize nominated. It won Book of the Year at the British Book Awards. It was a Waterstones Book of the Year, and also it has just found its way into so many people's hearts because of the way that it dissects the human heart. Like, it takes you into all 4 chambers of the human heart and says, this is what it is to love. This is what it is to feel. When Sally Rooney talks about this book, she says that she tries not to have too much distance from her characters. She tries to sort of sit with them and observe them rather than having a kind of moralistic standpoint. She's just sort of riding with these people, and that's exactly what this book feels like. And ultimately, what the literature Sally Rooney has produced tells us is one of the things we think about in life is love and connection and the people around us, the people that we love, the people that we interact with, and that is important, and we should make art about it. And so I think this is a seminal work. I love it, and it's a modern classic. You can argue with the wall. I don't care. This Is How You Lose the Time War is such an interesting collaboration between 2 writers, Amal El-Mohtar and Max Gladstone. And it's also kind of a collaboration between the 2 characters as well, because we alternate between their 2 perspectives. They are 2 beings on opposite sides of a time war. I think this pushes the envelope of what science fiction can and should be. The writing is exquisite. It's the kind of book that gets even better on a second, third, fourth read, and that's important too. That's what makes books like this persevere over time, because people keep wanting to reread them and keep wanting to talk about them and dissect them. If I were to speak about how wonderful this book is, I would lose my voice before I ran out of good things to say. That's how good I think this book is, and the more I think about it, the more that time passes, the more I realize this is a modern classic. The two beings are kind of writing love letters to one another and leaving them for each other to find over time. So it's sprawling in such a small volume, and I think it's great. So you should read this book if you haven't already. So ironically, this book is called This Is How You Lose the Time War, because really, this is winning the time war. This is going to be around for a very long time, I believe. Before I move on to talking about the next book, I am delighted to let you know that today's video is very kindly brought to you by Squarespace. Squarespace is the all-in-one platform for building a website or an online brand. And the best news is you don't need any web building expertise or skills or knowledge, because Squarespace has hundreds of incredible templates which you can customize and bring your vision for your perfect website to life. They also have incredible features. You can create a blog, you can make an email sign-up list, you can use flexible payments on your website. And Squarespace now also has AI SEO, so they can make sure that your website is being found by the right people, because what's the point of making a website if no one can find it? So if this sounds like fantastic news to you and you want to make a website that people will still be talking about in 100 years time, head to Squarespace and you can get a free trial, test it out, see what you think. And then when you're ready to launch your beautiful new website, you can use the code jackedwards at squarespace.com/jackedwards to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. You're welcome. And now onto the next book. Next, we have In Memoriam by Alice Winn. This reads like a classic. In fact, I kind of can't believe this only just came out last year. It definitely is in conversation with classics. I mean, the title takes its name from a Tennyson poem, and because it's set during the First World War, a lot of poetry from that time that was popular at that time and was revered at that time is kind of invoked and alluded to and recited. But the book is so much more than just that. It's a war story, it's also a love story, it's also a queer story. It's about these two guys at their boarding school who, at the advent of war, start to read the school newspaper, which has an in memoriam section, and they are starting to recognize the names of people they went to school with, boys who they studied with, who were out on the front lines fighting for their country and being killed. One of the two boys has German heritage, and people have started to kind of bombastic side-eye him, and so he decides to apply for the army. He lies about his age, and he suddenly finds himself on the front line. This is a boy who pages ago we were seeing in the school playground, and now he's on the front lines of a war, and his friend, who has always had this kind of latent crush on him, goes out to join him on the front lines. And it's all about how they negotiate their relationship now that they're in a completely new setting and atmosphere and climate. Again, this book is about human resilience. It's a really important novel. It won the Waterstones debut novel prize last year, as well as countless other awards. It deserves every single one. I hope Alice Winn's trophy cabinet is freaking huge, and I think we're still going to be talking about this for a very, very long time. Another book which is about the brutality of war is Black Butterflies by Priscilla Morris. This is set in Sarajevo during the Bosnian War, and it is about this one woman in the bombed remains of a city. And while it is specifically about Sarajevo, I do think that it speaks to the experience of watching a city you loved become ravaged by war in a more kind of universal way. There's this one scene that I will never, ever forget reading, where snow falls on Sarajevo, and just for a moment, while everything is blanketed in white, there's this kind of purity to it, and this sense of cleansing, that things can and will be okay, because if this miracle of nature is possible and these delicate, intricate snowflakes are able to fall on the city, then it's almost a reminder that there is hope, I suppose. And yet, this is problematized by the inevitability that that snow will melt and it becomes slush and sludge, and if anything, it makes things worse. And that just shattered my heart into tiny pieces and then made me tread on it like Lego bricks in your feet. It's haunting, it's evocative, it is astonishing, and is an elegy to a place and a community that were destroyed by war. This was shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction and is really underrated, I feel, as well. I really think this deserves more attention, success, and so it's in my list. What shall we go for next? Another recent release. The Bee Sting by Paul Murray. This book I've chosen because I think it deals with the climate crisis in a very, very interesting way. So ostensibly this book is about 4 people in a kind of nuclear family. You have the mum, the dad, and the 2 children. And over the course of the novel, we get all of their perspectives. So we start off with the children, and when the children are talking about their parents, initially, they kind of give us like an outline of them. They kind of feel like a bit of a caricature. And then we get the parents' perspectives, and we realize that often the same event can be perceived in many different ways. And there is always more than what we see on the surface. An example of this is a bee sting in the novel, which is perceived in very different ways by very different characters. As the book progresses, we keep seeing each of these characters' perspectives, but they get shorter and shorter until the book kind of resembles this spiral shape where we're getting increasingly tense and crisis seems to be becoming inevitable. There's a point where it can no longer be stopped or prevented. Each character is skillfully represented and portrayed. They burst off the page. Like I felt like they were sitting in the palm of my hand. But beneath all of this, there is also a discussion about the climate crisis, which also has this feeling of inevitability at a point where it is getting increasingly out of control. And I think the idea, the concept of the climate crisis is replicated by the narrative structure. I think it's absolutely genius. There is so much to this book. It's a very ambitious book. It will make you do emotional gymnastics. This is an emotional triathlon. I feel like I went through all of the stages of grief, and when I closed the final page, I threw it onto my bed and then just paced around the room for a little bit with my head in my hands. That's how good this is. If you don't know, get to know. This is a literal sting. Hamnet by Maggie O'Farrell. If you had £1 for every time I've spoken about how much I love this book, you would be a very rich person, because this, again, reads like a classic. It reimagines the life of Shakespeare, but doesn't ever mention William Shakespeare himself. It just talks about his wife and his children. One of his children, whose name was Hamnet, died very young. This won the Women's Prize for Fiction. It is a gorgeous illustration and depiction of grief. It will not only take your breath away, it will also have you in a custody battle to get it back. It's dazzling in its intricate and meticulous descriptions of nature and what it is to lose someone or something, and it's also devastating. It just destroyed me, and I said thank you. Thank you, Maggie O'Farrell. Could I get a repeat appointment? Could we set up like a direct debit and I'll just keep coming back for more of this, please? It's that good. Like, make a list for me of the 10 most frequently visited museums in the world, and then hang this up in every single one of them. Print 10 copies and hang them up, because the people need to know. The people need to experience this for themselves, and so that's why it's in my list. Damon Galgut, The Promise. This is an incredibly experimental book. It kind of uses the narrative perspective very fluidly. So the narrative voice and perspective moves freely between people, between inanimate objects, and the book is told in 4 parts. So it's divided up into 4, and each one is a funeral of a different kind, of a different religion or a different practice. And so we kind of know that some characters are gonna get the job, knocking on death's door, if you know what I mean. Of course you know what I mean. That was pretty, it's pretty straightforward. But the book is called The Promise, and I can promise you, you will be blown away. I hope that you are prepared for your feet to be chilly, because this will knock your socks off. The book is set in South Africa, and to me feels so innovative and new, like nothing I've ever experienced before. It felt generous in the way that it chose to explore each of the different characters and the culture and societies that they inhabit. I think this is just sheer excellence. If they could give out Michelin stars to books, this would have 3. Can you tell I have no idea how Michelin stars work, but my compliments to the chef. And this is a 25 course tasting platter. The next course is The Island of Missing Trees. This is by Elif Shafak. It is kind of, okay, this really reminds me of a Romeo and Juliet kind of star-crossed lovers situation, but set in Cyprus. It's about a Greek Cypriot and a Turkish Cypriot who fall in love underneath a fig tree at this restaurant, and we're alternating between the time in which they first met and then later on when they're married and they have a daughter together. They meet as teenagers in 1974, and the tree itself is a kind of character. It witnesses their whole love affair over the decades, and it's a book about perseverance, compassion, the power of nature being our greatest teacher, which is a very important kind of literary tradition. It has this kind of magical quality to it, despite also being incredibly brutal. As with many of these books, love and conflict kind of find themselves hand in hand in many situations, and love has to keep giving people the strength to carry on. And I love this book a lot. If I could marry an inanimate object, I'd be on the next flight to Vegas with this book in hand, and we would elope. So, on to the next book. Come on, you knew this was coming. You knew it was coming. Small things like these. Claire Keegan. Come on now. Firstly, a book that is short and concise, but still so powerful and meaningful must be a huge gift to any English teacher who is having to try and teach kids about books and wants them to actually read it. This book won the Orwell Prize for political fiction. It was shortlisted for the Rathbone Folio Prize and the Booker Prize. And you know what else it won? My heart. It won my affection. I will never stop talking about this book. Sorry. This book has my allegiance until the day that I die. If Claire Keegan started a cult, I probably would join it. Small Things Like These is a historical fiction novel about the way that so-called fallen women were mistreated by the church. It is deceptively simple, but Claire Keegan manages the pace and the tension so perfectly. It's set around Christmas Day, so it's a great winter read. I just feel like not a word is wasted. It builds up to be deeply, deeply moving, and I just want you to know that you heard it here first, because the movie is coming out next year, I believe, with Cillian Murphy playing Bob Furlong, who is the main character. And when that happens, I will be wearing one of those Challengers t-shirts that says, "I told ya." I want that on the record because I told you so. I did. I'm telling you right now, Small Things Like These is anything but small. This is an incredibly powerful book, and you should absolutely read it, because I guarantee that your grandkids in the future will be like, "Oh, I'm reading this book at school," and you'll want to sound smart to them. So do it for your future self. The next book I would like to put forward as one of the most important books of this generation is The Hunger Games. I really think it's about time we put some respect on the legacy of this book and how culturally significant this is. This changed the way that we talk about culture and society. It's very common now to hear people refer to things as Hunger Games-esque. We saw this a lot with the commentary of the Met Gala this year, people saying it was like the Capitol. If someone said to you, "I volunteer as tribute," you would know exactly what they were referring to. And I think that it's important that just because this book was primarily written for a younger audience or had a younger audience in mind and can be understood by that audience, it doesn't mean that it's not good. It means that it's universal. It means that it is able to resonate with pretty much anyone. To me, this is an extremely significant and important book. It was also part of a cultural wave of teen dystopia, and that was a wave I was surfing. If your name is Patrick Starr and you have been living under an actual rock, The Hunger Games is a televised show in which young people have to kill each other, and the last survivor is the winner. 2 contestants are put forward from each of the districts in this land as a reminder from the capital of their power. We follow Katniss Everdeen, who volunteers to enter the games when her sister is randomly chosen. We follow her journey as she tries to survive. The Hunger Games, need I say more? Now, one other quality that kind of makes a classic is when a book is in conversation with another classic. When one book is in constant dialogue with another, and that is what My Dark Vanessa is. My Dark Vanessa is a modern response to the book Lolita. It's by Kate Elizabeth Russell. It actually gets its title from a different Nabokov book called Pale Fire. This may be incredibly triggering for some people. It is provocative in that way because it is about a highly inappropriate relationship a young girl has with her teacher. She is 15 the first time that they do things together, and decades later the teacher has been accused of abuse by another fellow student. A journalist then asks our main character to comment on this, and it kind of creates this inner turmoil where she starts to realize that actually she was the victim as well. She has spent her whole life believing, or at least trying to convince herself, that it was love that she was experiencing, and only now as an adult does she start to realize that actually maybe it was something a little bit different and more sinister. It's incredibly gripping. It reads like a thriller. It's also deeply disturbing, but that is My Dark Vanessa. Next up, we have Shuggy Bane by Douglas Stewart. I chose this book because of the way that it talks about addiction and also the intensity and intricacy, I suppose, of its character creation. It's about a young boy called Shuggy, but more importantly, it's about his mother, who is an addict, but also kind of through no fault of her own. This is a book about poverty and abuse and a real exercise in empathy, I think, because you really have to walk a mile in both of these characters' shoes. I found it interesting because you see this very vivid description of Shuggy's mother. Her name is Agnes, and you can tell that she is trying her best and you're rooting for her so hard, but at the same time, you can also recognize that she is a terrible mother to Shuggy, even though she doesn't want to be bad. I think it's a lesson in how two things can be true at the same time. You can be really, really rooting for Agnes, whilst also recognizing that Shuggy is in an incredibly unhealthy, unsafe, unreliable environment for him. It chronicles this woman's downfall, but also both of these characters will sort of dig their way into your heart. They'll like nestle there. I kept forgetting that there was a paper page with writing printed on it in black and white between me and these characters. I genuinely felt like I was looking them in the eye and hearing them speak. That is how real they feel. That is how tangible those characters feel, and this is such an achievement. It also won the Booker Prize, as well as many, many other achievements. It was a Daily Telegraph Book of the Year, the Times Novel of the Year, and deservingly so. This is such a great book. So that is Shuggy Bane. Okay, this book kind of has similar themes, but instead of being set in the Scottish tenements, this is set in, where is it? Virginia, I think? I'm double checking that. Yes, I'm right. Okay, this book is a retelling of David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, but instead it is Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver. I actually went to a talk that she did where she said she went to Charles Dickens' old house and he spoke to her and told her to write this book. And it's wackadoodle time, I guess, but I'm grateful because this book is incredible. Again, this character is so vividly written. Every single metaphor or simile or phrase that he uses feels exactly like what this character would. He has such a distinctive narrative voice and character voice. I felt like I knew him. I felt like I just wanted to tell him everything was going to be okay. This book also deals with the theme of addiction. This and Shuggy Bane are kind of very similar books, but I think both very important. In fact, I would love to write a comparative essay about these two. Don't tempt me. Don't tempt me. Don't tempt me with a good time. That's all I'm saying. These books are so incredible, and I think both of them also consider the idea that poverty is not a choice. It is something that happens to you, especially if you are born into poverty. It's about people who did not win the postcode lottery. In this book, Demon is growing up in a trailer. Both boys, Shuggy and Demon, have abusive fathers. You know, these books are very interesting. Demon Copperhead is like a brick of a novel, but it's a brick I would like to build a castle from and then live in it. Barbara Kingsolver, you sit upon a throne in my brain. I think you're brilliant. And I think we have 5 books left. Sticking with somewhat of a theme of masculinity, Open Water by Caleb Azumah Nelson. This is a modern love story which is soundtracked by the most beautiful kind of contemporary references to R&B and hip hop. It is an exploration of the city, of masculinity, of police brutality, of the black male body and its role and its perception in society, what it is to be perceived but also to exist in that body. It's so touching and heartfelt. It's about those anxieties at the beginning of a new relationship when you're kind of feeling yourself, starting to give yourself over to somebody, but you're scared that you might not be flying but falling, you know, not waving but drowning. It's about that feeling of fear that you are being vulnerable. But I'm so glad that the author, Caleb Azumah Nelson, chose to be vulnerable, because this is such a gift. If I found this wrapped with a little bow under my Christmas tree, I would be very happy about it. So lyrical, it reads like poetry, just silky smooth. I want to turn this into a garment and wear it on my body every single day. Thank you very much. Next up, we have, it ends with, I'm kidding. That one was a joke. Next up, we actually have Homefire by Kamala Shamsi, another winner of the Women's Prize for Fiction, as well as being shortlisted for the Costa Best Novel Award of 2017. This is about modern Britain, and I think if you keep up with British politics, this is so highly pertinent and important. We follow 2 sets of families, and a really important facet of this novel is people's relationships to their fathers. So on one hand, we have these 3 siblings whose father was a jihadist, and one of them becomes radicalized. And then on the other hand, we have a son of a politician, and that politician has sort of stoked anti-Muslim politics and policies in order to secure votes for himself. And it's those exact policies that have marginalized the boy who has become radicalized. So it's really interesting as a kind of dynamic. And then one of the siblings falls in love with the son of the politician. So you have lots of really interesting dynamics and relationships going on. The end of this book shocked me to my very core. I am still to this day scraping my jaw off of the floor, it's one of those books that I will just never ever forget the reading experience, because it is in equal parts intimate and shocking. Home fire, more like home run, because this knocks it out the park. The girl with the louding voice. This makes me think of those tweets that are like, I don't want to go to school today. I'm sorry, Malala. You should be apologizing to Abidari as well, because this is a book all about the importance of education. It's set in Nigeria. It's about a 14-year-old girl who has a louding voice, and she recognizes that education is what can unlock a brighter future for her. And so that is her biggest ever goal. She embarks on a physical journey, but also an emotional one. It is a kind of coming of age novel all about the way that education can mobilize people, and this book is galvanizing. It is so important. It is about an extremely courageous character determined to make more from her life than she has been given, and I think it's very empowering and important, and I do think everyone should read it. White Teeth, Zadie Smith. Come on. Did you think you were gonna get a list of 25 modern classics and not get a Zadie Smith novel in there? Please behave yourself. The fact that this is a debut is frankly outrageous. That makes me want to throw myself off the nearest building. Never mind. I've seen this described as a generous, big-hearted novel, and I think that is so accurate. Like, the way that Zadie Smith presents her characters is so fair, and I think that's really important, you know, to have empathy for characters. We follow 3 cultures, 3 families, 3 generations in modern Britain. It's funny and idiosyncratic. Zadie Smith has this kind of wicked sense of humor that I just love, but she also writes with this real self-assurance in the same way that I think other writers like Toni Morrison and James Baldwin and Christopher Isherwood and people who were observing society and humankind and people around them. You know, Christopher Isherwood said, I am a camera, I'm observing, I'm a voyeur of what is going on around me, and I'm putting it on paper. I think that's what Zadie Smith did too, and I am very grateful to her for it. This is an altar I would worship at. Hanya, get over here. You knew it was going to be in the list. Hanya Yanagihara, A Little Life. Probably the most controversial book on this list. It has caused a lot of discourse. People have cried on the internet over this book. I might be one of them. Hanya Yanagihara should be personally responsible for my therapy bills, because what she does is she makes you fall in love with these 4 characters who are just best friends growing up together, and then she destroys them. It cut through to the bone, straight to the jugular. You know what I'm saying? This is severe but unforgettable. It's about love and friendship, and we watch these people grow up. One thing I really love about this book is that there are no time indicators, in the sense that
Oh, that's no. In the sense that
I can't say that without thinking of Kelly Osbourne, for fuck's sake. Let me try one more time. In the sense that we know that time is passing because there are Thanksgivings and birthdays and Christmases, but we never have any mention of specific historical events or technological advances. And taking all of those details out that create historical context means that we're just left with the bare bones of these 4 people and their immediate circle, JB, Malcolm, Willem, and Jude, and we watch as they meander through life and face the peaks and troughs that an existence presents you with. They also fall in and out of each other's lives. I just realized that my light turned off. I forgot to turn it back on. Okay, we're so back. Sorry about that. Sorry if I've been dimly lit for the last few books. My camera died, and seemingly so did the light, because I've been yapping for so long. This is Yap City, population 1. But anyway, this book, shortlisted for the US National Book Awards, winner of the British Book Industry Award for Fiction, shortlisted for the Booker Prize, shortlisted for the Women's Prize. I just think this has such emotional complexity. And though it's long, I raced through this book. I swear, Hanya laced these pages with crack, because I could not put it down. So that is A Little Life, but it is anything but little. It is big in the things it seeks to convey, and I will die on this hill that this is an excellent book, and the fact that it triggers such intense emotional responses from people only proves my point. And finally, Piranesi. Piranesi is this haunting, slow book about a character who is in this kind of unknown and unknowable place where there are columns and vestibules and statues and a lot of water and stairs, and it feels hard. Every time I try and recommend this book, I struggle, because I feel like the less you know going into this book, the better. It's one of those books where I would sell my soul to read this book again for the first time and experience it again with fresh eyes. And I want you to have that experience too. So I don't want to say too much, but what I will say is be patient young one. Be patient, child. Trust the process. Don't give up on it. This is a remarkable achievement. Susanna Clarke is insane. Like, she is mad. She wrote this huge book called Dr. Jonathan and Mr. Strange, or Mr. Jonathan and Dr. Strange, one variation of those two things, which is a massive book. She disappears for years and years and years, like over a decade, I think. And then she comes back with this slim thing, like the Ozempic of books. It's a tiny little thing. It's like she gave her literary work Ozempic. Like suddenly she comes back with this tiny little thing, and it's magical and it's wonderful and it's spellbinding and shocking and stays with you forever. And I'm being deliberately vague because, like I said, I think you need to read this without knowing what happens. All I'll say is that I've recommended this to multiple people in my life and they've come back to me and said, that's the best thing I've ever read. Thank you. And that's all I'll say on that. Thank you for watching this video. Thank you so much for sticking with me. I feel like I've been filming for absolutely years, but these are books I could frankly talk about for the rest of the century. That's how good they all are. And I hope that people are still talking about them in 10, 15, 20, 100 years time. My prediction is that they absolutely will be, even if it's just me alone, like man shouts at cloud. I'll keep fighting the good fight to make sure that more people read these books. Thank you for watching. For more recommendations from me, you can follow me on TikTok, on Instagram, over on my second channel. You can subscribe here if you're new. And thanks so much for watching this video. I love you. All the best. Stay in touch. Have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.